his criticism of old materialism or metaphysical materialism is that the latter, that is metaphysical materialism, conceives of the objective world in abstraction from human activity and the historically specific form of its actualization. That is the historically specific form of actualization of human activity. So together with this new materialism, practical materialism, if you wish, or communism, even if you will call it, as Marx would say, the objective social world we encounter is the product of objective human corporeal and intellectual activity. Objectivity in this sense is human activity objectivized. So this does not mean that, like new materialism, better to say like historical materialism maybe, or Marxist materialism, denies the existence of the objective world. No doubt that the objective world exists. Like in Marx's approach, nature is the necessary condition of human action. The necessity of human activity is due to her confrontation with a world independent of herself. Objectivity, however, is the transformation of nature into a determinate moment of human activity in the form of inorganic extension of humans' existence. So, for instance, if you jump a little bit ahead in Marx's writing, okay, not ahead, I'm sorry, going back a little bit, I'm sorry, to 1844 manuscript, you will read something like this, that a being which does not have its nature outside itself, is not a natural being and plays no part in the system of nature. A being which has no object outside itself is not an objective being. A being which is not itself an object for some third being has no being for its object. In other words, it is not objectively related. Its being is not objective. So, I mean, this is in a sense, like some sort of Marx's, like a concise answer to the caprice of those philosophers, the so-called, for instance, skeptics, that, just go around these pseudo questions of, like, is there an external world? Is there not an external world? This is something, what I'm trying to say, this is something beyond, like something beyond doubt. It cannot be even doubted, and that's why Marx thinks that, like the old materialism, the metaphysical materialism of Feuerbach is, is problematic in the sense that it limits itself to this somatic understanding, the substantial understanding. It is still, like, it's kind of, like within some sort of family relationship with old metaphysics, with idealism, so on and so forth. So let us open this up a little bit, this problem of objectivity. So objectivity of nature is the precondition and source of objectivity of human labor. Human labor is like the height of human praxis, so to say, and of course of human consciousness, which itself is the product of labor or product of activity. In this sense, consciousness is external, even consciousness, just like labor, okay? It is objective. So the unity of consciousness and nature, or the subject-object unity, if you want to use a more fancy philosophical language, okay, is attainable only externally as the unity in nature, okay? It is not unity in my mind, for instance, or individual's mind. And it's possible only through the mediation of praxis. Well, because human itself is a material thing, and an external entity, okay, its activity can take an objective form, meaning that it can be effective and can transform and produce nature. Produce nature in what sense? Like in the sense of, like inform it with the forms of human activity, so to say. In a similar vein, we come to this problem of the truth and reality of human thinking, for instance, as a particular, kind of human activity. Let's say the source of truth of natural laws that human discovers and humans discovers. What is the source of veracity, let's say, of these laws? It is the externality of the objective being of human. So were she not an external objective being, as Marx just stated, were she a mere internality, okay, a sort of consciousness that is in opposition to external. So it's like something like closed without any windows opening into the nature. She could have not affect nature, and she would have not any window open to nature. Like it's like the situation of some sort of an omnipresent, omniscient, omni whatever God. Like if there is something that absolute, okay, and that's something that's a problem, of course, that comes up in critique of Hegel's philosophy as well. If there is something that absolute, like the spirit and so on and so forth, it cannot have a history, for so to say, because it would not have any opportunity, neither the need nor the opportunity to act, so to say. Okay, so that's the reason. Still, like now that I just brought up Hegel, something came to my mind. Let me put this as well. Like despite the idealist attribution of objectivity and absoluteness to spirit, of course, on the side of Hegel, had the self-consciousness or the spirit been absolute in the idealist sense, as I said, it would have no objectivity and would fall short in realizing itself in nature, owing to its lacking an objective nature. That's what I'm trying to say. So the absoluteness of self-consciousness in this sense, that Marx would argue, is nothing but absolute emptiness in that case. A void that is similar to absolute emptiness and lack of, like vitality. That is, like a main attribute of capital, so to say. Now, as if we go back to Marx's concept of nature, and in contradistinction to say that of Feuerbach or idealist, well, due to this, dependence on human activity, nature assumes or attains this historical character. So let's ask this question. I mean, what does the historicity of nature mean? In this picture, historicity of nature pertains to the interdependence of human and nature, which are united and divided through human activity. Like human, due to necessity that is imposed on her by nature, has to, somehow, if you wish, react to nature. And this is through this action that, it would kind of posits itself as, let's say, subject, and posits the objectivity of the object as nature, let's say. And then, like it is within this activity, with this interconnection, that the two sides are being, posited as, unitary contradictories, so to say. So since nature for Marx is the primary source of all instruments and objects of labor from the outset, it is considered in relation to human activity. That's another thing, of course, like. So, like, as I said, nature, Marx said that it's the condition, like, and the condition and the main cause of human practice. But it's also, like the source of all these instruments. It provides humans with instruments, with objects to work with, so to say. So in this sense, disregarding human activity and its role in manipulating the social nature, mechanical materialism, that is Feuerbach materialism, recapitulates the idealist attitude that considers abstract thinking as the only genuine activity. And the estranged or alienated entities of this activity, let's say such as state, the law, religion, as thought entities or products of pure abstract philosophical thinking. Okay, that's the thing. So there you can make, of course, the link between this, like Marx's critical attitude or practical critical attitude against Feuerbachian materialism against Hegelian idealism, as well as like his particular criticism against all these institutes that are supposedly like products of this pure abstract philosophical thinking, state, religion, law, so to say. I believe that like this is being quite concisely, quite like in a very concentrated way, is being let's say expressed in this thesis in Marx, like that Feuerbach Feuerbach wants sensus objects. That's what it reads. Really distinct from conceptual objects, but does not conceive human activity itself as objective activity. So in the sense of Christianity, he therefore regards a theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, while practice is conceived and defined only in its dirty Jewish form of appearance. Hence, he does not grasp the significance of revolutionary, of practical, critical activity. Yeah, that's a thesis, eh? Perhaps you already read that. And of course, this is where, like Marx is, say, if you wish, like a philosophical project, critical philosophical project is linked to his political project. I mean, it's not linked as a matter of fact. It happens to like appear as these, I would say, different forms of appearance or different forms of existence of this critical revolutionary, I would say, praxis. So then, what does this thesis tells us? Like because Feuerbach, supposedly is like critical of idealism, but Marx somehow, trying to underline that there are shortcomings in this Feuerbachian critical attitude. So, in contrast to that, Marx's rejection of idealism would not be an abstract rejection similar to that of Feuerbach. He does not simply invert the relation between object and subject, like as if you remember in the case of, like the relation between God creating human after his image. Whereas with Feuerbach, we had this, like conversion, like the conversion of predicate and subject. And then we came up to realize that supposedly that the genuine, the religion is that one, within which, so to say, it is God that is made or has been created after the image of man, so to say. So Marx would not stop at that point. Okay, it's not just this inversion. He's not satisfied with that. He does not replace the subject with man. Human in Feuerbach's philosophy still is this unhistorical or ahistorical abstract being that is identical to its own nature. Yeah, and so is the extra-human existence. If you remember from the readings of the prior weeks, like the introductory parts of Essence of Christianity. Though, like we have to also underline this, that Feuerbach's most important achievement and his contribution to critical praxis lies in that he unveils the human essence of religion. Okay, that's important. That would be one theme that would be running in Marx's later criticism as well. But this is where his failure, as a matter of fact, lies too, as he conceives of man, as I said, as this transhistorical, as this expression of species being, a natural being and not man in his daily earthly existence. Yeah, that's actually what Marx openly tells, like in the thesis I just quoted. So he is not, like a human is not just natural being. It's not this being in the daily life, in earthly existence. It is not the human that acts, okay, that acquires specific socio-historical forms, so to say. So through his method of conversion, what he comes up with is a human as God alongside a deified man or deified human. Man here is like this man with capital M, okay? It's not, I'm trying to use it supposedly, like gender free. And he shows them to be identical. And that's why he criticizes the ignorance of such, and it criticizes the ignorance of such an identity, but does not criticize the essence of religion. Yes, if you remember. So that's why he, remember Feuerbach stating that. I have this quote from previous week. However, the hidden nature of religion, which remains opaque to religion itself, is transparent to the thinker who makes it the object of his thought. And our task, Feuerbach says, consists precisely in showing that the antithesis of divine and human is illusory. Yep. That is, that it is nothing other than the antithesis between the essential being of man and his individual being. And that consequently, the object and content of Christian religion are altogether human. Okay. So that's perhaps, like the whole, the Feuerbachian's, like critical project boils down into this. Whereas Marx, on the contrary, like it's very interesting. Like as you see, there's nothing here about, like, there's no space for human activity, no space for human agency, so to say. Nothing. It's just, a matter of consciousness, as you say. We are ignorant, some people are ignorant of the identity and between the divine and the human, okay? And once, like we change that, let's say attitude, perhaps through education, that's one theme, again, the thesis that Marx talks about, like the division of human society into educators and those to be educated, so to say. And then we get rid of this, where we become illuminated, so to say. And this is, like in this sense, it's a rejection of whatever that is positive, so to say, in Hegelian idealism. Marx, on the contrary, accepts the idealist thesis that the world exists through mediation of subject. Okay. He, however, brings his thought, this thought to its true essence. Marx, like the subject for Marx is not the spirit, not the ego, like in Fichte's sense, not the transcendental subject. It is not the man either. Like that's the thing. Like Feuerbachian man is very similar to this. Like Fichtean ego, for instance. Actually, Marx talks about this in a letter that he writes back in 1843, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 43, to Feuerbach, and like draws his attention to the similarities between his treatment of notion of man and Fichte's ego. So it's ego, so to say. So the subject in Marx, the subject as the creator of reality, is this socio-historical human or socio-historical humanity, social humanity, the active human. Extra-human reality, therefore, is a function of humans' productive activity in this sense. Like it becomes relevant, this extra, social, extra-human reality, it becomes relevant to the extent that falls within the boundaries of human activity. Yeah. So, of course, as I said, just be careful. I mean, this is no idealism. This is not rejecting of, like rejection of any rejection of I would say, the independent existence of reality. Not at all. But, like it is a very interesting materialist, genuine materialist solution to, for instance, if you want to stay just within the framework of philosophy, it's a very genuine solution or resolution to the problem, let's say, of the thing in itself and, like the thing for myself. Like Hegel, for instance, realized that, like, I mean, think in itself can only be a moment of thing for myself, okay? But then he treats this in this mystic language of like this emanation of spirit, let's say. Okay, you have any questions so far? Just going to continue. Okay, I keep on going. There's not, okay. Now, the second thing I want to, again, touch upon in this context with reference to thesis, like generally, is the problem of reality of thinking. Yes, and that's again one of the issues that brought up in one of the theses. The problem of this worldliness of thinking, so to say. This is, of course, one of the many issues touched upon. Like if you read Bloch, for instance, he had at least talks about four major problems, like yes, being touched upon. Like in the thesis. That's how he categorized them: problem of epistemology, problem of praxis, so on and so forth. So I'm just trying to further comment on that as well. So, well, about the problem of reality of thinking. Okay. Marx links logic of practical material life, for instance, such as the logic of commodity exchange, to logics of schools of thought, such as utilitarianism and logic of early modern science, modern natural sciences. Now, why I brought this up, it's that, like we'll come to that. But the thing is this. I remember that Dr. Saladdin touched upon this in the very first lecture that we had. That, for instance, Feuerbach, when he talks about religion or perversion of religious thought, this atheistic religion, so to say, or non-religious religion, if you wish, or whatever, like all these type of things, or that that Feuerbach stops there, like that's it. Says, well, we have religion. That's religion. We have bad consciousness or false consciousness, if you will. For Marx, this is not enough again. I mean, like this is something that not because Marxism is epistemologically unhappy with this, but it is something that is I would say, that is determined by his revolutionary methodology. So it is not enough just to point to the phenomenon. If we are doing science, if really there is some sort of scientific value to our praxis, to revolutionary praxis, and of course to philosophical praxis, it has to show the historical necessity of certain modes of thinking as well, right? And that's why Marx makes this links between, let's say, logical, practical, material life and this different schools of thought. That's how he realizes, that Adam Smith, alongside Hegel, alongside, the contemporary religious institutions, are just, again, forms of existence of human immiseration, the process of human immiseration, so to say. So, and of course, natural sciences as well are not, an exemption. Marx, in this regard, considers Hegel a crude empiricist. It's very interesting, just empiricism, not because the latter refers to empirical data, not in that sense. Not even solely because Hegel does not seem to be aware that conceiving of the factual is itself conceptual. Perhaps Hegel is the champion of those type of, wordings and so on and so forth. The core of Marx's, I would say, unease with Hegel or criticism of Hegel is that Hegel separating the content and the form, the concept and the fact, as if, concept is some sort of vase and, fact is some sort of liquid that fills it up. Yes. So that's why, it's this Hegelian mediation, this mediation of spirit, this activity, the abstract activity of spirit, looks mechanical. And it is something that is attainable only externally. What I'm trying to say is this. So, because Hegel, champions supposedly or advocates this, explication or unfolding of this immanent logic of the movement of the spirit, so to say, of the movement of the world. But because he disregards the reality, the real link that unites all these, phenomena with a true logic, to borrow, like a word of Ilyenkov, because when, it is required that he explains the logic of the logic with reference to reality, to the phenomenal world, he becomes a logician, a pure logician, like the former logician, okay? And that's why, his logic becomes some sort of superficial, external, Whereas for Marx, mediation, for Marx, mediation, or in Marx's approach, mediation is something immanent, as I said. It works from within phenomena. It signifies the contradictions within a system, and synthesis through mediation, forming a high level contradiction, so to say. So these are contradictions coming out of life, like just to make it very crude, for instance. When you think about, if you think, like, for instance, through the lenses of this superficial idealist or positivistic, if you wish, understanding of, let's say, history, okay, you'll see all these, like categorization, or, division of, like human history into these different eras. Like the era of scientific thinking, pre-scientific thinking, so on and so forth. Okay, and the era of religious thinking, for instance, if you read Kant, and that's like what Marx says, like when Hegel becomes positivistic, why? Because, for instance, in this understanding, the fact that like there is this tendency towards secularization, let's say, in society on the one hand, okay, that we have in human history this tendency towards secularization. When you look at it in reality, it does, secularization does not exclude the rise of, let's say, the rise of religious thinking. Okay. So in the story that, like Hegel tells us, let's say, in the phenomenology, we have these different, like moments in the life of spirit. We have this moment of religion, we have this moment of, family, we have this moment of state, blah, 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 so to say. These are something that should be left behind, though, of course, it talks about sublation of them and so on and so forth. But, like somehow these contradictions, or these, like contradictions in this sense, these should be left behind, and, like they should be, in a sense, boxed away. But in reality, they're not, yes? For instance, when you look at the world today, you see this rise of fanaticism, rise of, fanatic Islamism, like political Islamism, and so on and so forth. And then Marx would say that, hey, you have to explain this as a moment of real history, as a moment of, right. You have to explain it immanently with relation to, or as a phenomenon of the doing of the mode of activity, of the mode of doing, like of human beings, so to say, human beings. And like, so what happens with this? With this becomes, again, back to this notion of the identity between object and subject, between the essence and the appearance. Okay, and it is, like the whole thing is, because when we read, like when we look at this progress of it, say the social historical, like not progress in the sense of progress, but like developments, let's say, the unfolding of history, all in all, can say that this is humans doing and acting and so on and so forth. Okay, so therefore, like that's when Marx says that, when we come to this question about, like the objectivity, the objective truth of human thinking, right? So I'll wrap it up for you. Let me read this thesis. The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. Okay, man must prove the truth, in other words, the reality and power, the disworldliness of his thinking in practice. The dispute over the reality or non-reality of thinking, which isolates itself from practice, is a purely scholastic question. So this is, of course, a thesis that has been, is addressing, like Feuerbach in a sense. But in another sense, like Marx also, like pointing, like criticizes with this thesis, not only Feuerbach, but also Hegel and all these idealists and, like left, right, like Hegelians, so on and so forth. That they all get into this dispute, for instance, you know, why we have religion, why we have this, why we have that. So this is one of the problems that's actually that, you know, like Bloch brilliantly talks about, for instance, that the way that the forms of, you know, like, for instance, reactions of Bauer brothers, Max Stirner, you know, like, and others, you know, and Marx and Engels to rise up, let's say, to rise up tyranny, so to say, despotism after the collapse of, let's say, 1848 revolution, and so on and so forth. So then now this problem of reality of thinking, because the problem of reality thinking is also related to the problem of reality or veracity of knowledge. That's another, you know, like, I would say, aspect of this question. In Marxian conceptualization of knowing, Marxian conceptualization of knowing, if we look at the problem like this, I mean, if we look at the problem of veracity of thinking as a matter of praxis, would drastically change from the rationalist and you know, empiricist conceptualization. So what is that? What is different then here? You know, like, well, thinking is something that is happening in the world. Okay, thinking is a human activity. The world, as a matter of fact, is a world of human activity, so to say, right? And eventually, you know, like, it is only through this link, this third, you know, like, I would say, this middle term, this third term activity, that human and reality form this unity, and of course this contradiction as well. Okay, so in empiricists and rationalists, you know, like, views, you know, the dictum to follow is when it comes to knowledge, when it comes in reality, the problem of relation to reality, is it's this, that the dictum to follow is this: observe and learn. Yes, that's how they say. You make observations, and then eventually, after those observations, you gather data, this, that, whatever. Then you devise some theory and you apply it, so on and so forth. Well, Marx would reject this on many grounds, but in any ways, you know, Marx's method would be rooted in a different dictum, as that, you know, like, our humans, you know, like, confrontation with reality is not it's not based on this, you know, like, dictum of, you know, observe and learn, but it's based on active, you know, act and change. So, you know, like, of course, you see that, you know, like, it resonates in the 11th thesis, like, humans are destined to change things, you know, that's a thing. For instance, when it comes to sciences, let's say, for the rationalists and empiricists, okay, the object of science is something that is given transhistorically. Yes, it is immutable. It is an atomic fact, and the subject of, I would say, scientific or cognitive observation is a neutral, pure spirit. I mean, whose cognitive activity is motivated by natural curiosity, if you wish. Okay, so there is this, you know, like, perhaps you have, I don't know. I mean, I have, you know, like, faced with this banal question many times that, oh, you know, Marx says that, you know, the problem is to change the world. But before you change the world, you have to know it. You know, like, say what? So that's that banality actually is rooted in this kind of empiricist dogma that you observe and learn, and all the objects and you know, like, the subject connotation of transhistorical and so on and so forth. For Marx, whereas for Marx's materialism, knowledge prior to changing activity is a contradiction in terms. It's impossible. You know, like, it's very funny, as a matter of fact. You know, it's not funny. It's interesting, as a matter of fact. And this is, you know, like, where, again, despite all the differences, Marx and Hegel comes close, you know, or sometimes you see the second Hegel, the revolutionary Hegel. In phenomenology, okay, Hegel at some point, you know, just mucking with the empiricists, for instance, okay, states something like this. I really like this quote, you know, like, that says, you know, like, mucking with this dictum of observe and learn, or this, you know, kind of, let's say, neutral kind of neutral relation to the world, says that, you know, like, even the animals showed themselves to be most profoundly initiated into wisdom. For they do not just stand idly in front of senses things, as if these possessed intrinsic being, but despairing of their reality and completely assured of their nothingness, they fall to without ceremony to eat them up. Like this is a very concise, like I say, proper, like criticism of like of this view of this pacifistic view that comes, of course, abstract, as Marx says, in idealism of Hegel, in Hegel's idealism. So I mean, like the empiricist stance, and of course the old materialist stance is even below, as a matter of fact, the animal way of, like I would say, the animal's, if you wish, instinctive, way of getting in touch with reality. Okay, not that I have anything against animals, or not that I say they're lower, no, but just try to say, because like these philosophers of this breed, they like like to pose themselves as like superior, as members of human species. So for the materialist dialectician, the quest for knowledge then is the socio-historically determined activity of manipulation of the world, and it is not then separable from the historically specific social needs and the forms of relations of production. Okay, so it all comes out of this, like this problem of veracity of thinking. And Marx would continue actually along these lines in German ideology at some point, stating this. This is a quote that also you perhaps read it in the section of the Principle of Hope by Bloch, that in German ideology, Marx and Engels state something like this, that Feuerbach speaks of, in particular, of the perception of natural science. He mentions secrets which are disclosed only to the eyes of the physicist and chemist. But where will natural science be without industry and commerce? Even this pure natural science is provided with an aim, as with its material, only through trade and industry, through the senses activity of man. Okay, so that's where we came. So back to the reality of thinking as a problem of praxis, or praxis as a criterion of truth, if you wish. So I'm just going to wrap it up now. Like, so what I touch upon now is just what I tried to come up with was like, what is the source of truth of thought, or is there a problem of truth of thought? Okay, which is like, because this I have to touch upon this. So I think that the working out of praxis as a proper as a philosophical category in the Marxist sense, and Marx and Engels' sense of the term, is very important. So praxis as a criterion truth, in my view, requires a reworking of the concept of praxis. The problem, in a sense, is not the veracity of thinking, but as Marx says, it is the disworldliness of thinking. This world, because it talks about this world. This word signifies the world of appearances. And that's the only word that we have, by the way. The world as social reality, yes? Because we know the world only through the social mediation. The only word we know, okay? That is the only word we know. That is provided by industry and trade, as just Marx said, Marx and Engels mentioned in this quote, for instance, in German ideology. Thus, in a sense, like thinking is inevitably disworldly. Okay, so this term, that disworldliness of thinking, that Marx brings up in this thesis, in a sense, he says that, well, in this first and basic and fundamental sense, thinking is disworldly, anyways. But this first sense of disworldliness of thinking implies a second sense, that thinking is already true, as it is thinking of this world, yes? The offspring of this world, like the thinker is just a kid of this world, is a child of this world. the reflection, conceptual reconstruction of this world. So there's no problem of verification of thinking in and against reality. So the problem is not that. Thinking is always true. I mean, if it wouldn't, it would be weird. Like if it wouldn't be true. I mean, then if it wouldn't be true, then we would say that, oh, it's different, like substance, for instance. So in this fundamental sense, Hegel is right, though in a perverse way, in defining the world as a moment of thinking. But Hegel tells just half the story. That's the problem, half the truth. So if you put this materialistically, that the world is the moment of thinking, it is so because thinking is that of this world. Okay, so thinking has no exceptional place to be attributed to. There's no problem in this sense. Thinking is not something above, beyond, on the side, or whatever, despite this world. And therefore, there's no problem of match, identity, duality of thinking and reality, of theory and praxis. So in this sense, this problem points towards a scandal in philosophy. There hasn't been such a problem at all, in a sense, okay? But the problem is that, and the question is, why such a perverse formulation runs through all breeds of bourgeois philosophies, okay? Why is it the case? So, and that's where, the Marx's project that is being, kind of summarized in a sense, not summarized, but put forwards in an outlines in the thesis comes to the fore. So the question would be revealing the social form of the relation of knowing and the to be known, okay? Why this particular object is being chosen? That is, under which historical determinate conditions? Why this particular instrument is deployed? Why the question of thinking, the problem of thinking, is being formulated in this perverse way, okay? What is the source of this perversion itself? That's one of the questions that Marx would ask. What's the source of, religious perversion? What's the source of, of legal perversion, so to say, that manifests itself in forms of nation state, so to say. Okay, so reworking praxis as a philosophical category then, should also reveal the inevitability of such perversion that attributes divinity, transcendence, eternality, etc., to thought and thinking. So, in a sense, Hegel was condemned, as a matter of fact. He had no other choice. He was destined to arrive in such a positivistic position that he attempted to criticize. Because his thinking was truly the thinking of this world. It was bound to this world. So the limit of Hegel's thinking, Hegel's thought, was this world, that of civil society. Again, that's something that Hegel has in common with Feuerbach. Whereas the limit of Hegel's himself, okay, was his own thought. And that is why, he arrives at this inevitable conclusion that the Minerva flights only after the dusk. So that's the thing, so I would say I try to wrap it up that, the source of this perversion and everything, it goes back to this, the problem of unity of human and nature, so to say, through human praxis, which determine all, our conceptualization due to the determinate social form it acquires in different, historical era. So that's what I had to say for tonight. Sorry if I took your time a lot. I hope I was not very long. I